Hello and welcome to today's webinar, an introduction to cross-section templates. So we're taking a bit of an unconventional format to today's webinar and we're going to focus on key concepts that you need to know in order to work with cross-section templates, which are arguably the most difficult part about RoadEng. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you here in this live version of the webinar, please ask questions and engage with us through the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar panel. We will tackle those questions at the end of the webinar. And if you're watching this off of our YouTube channel in the not so distant future, you're welcome to type a question in the comment section below and we'll respond to you there. So let's get started. So we'll start with the basics. What are cross-section templates? Now, cross-section templates are like mini computer programs built within a computer program, and they allow you to set parameters such as road width, surfacing depths, your shoulders, ditches, cut and fill slopes. They interact with a bunch of different things in order to be able to figure out how to set those parameters. They're interacting with your topography, your super elevation, subsurfaces, other alignments. Now, a road design without a cross-section is pretty much simply an alignment. That is to say, with no surface information, project footprint, or volumes would it be able to be present. So cross-section geometry is a really important part of the design and, as I mentioned, probably one of the most complicated. So our plan today is to break down cross-section templates into 10 key concepts that you need to understand in order to work with them inside of RoadEng. So we're going to step through each of these 10 concepts, building layer upon layer. So the first concept, templates have logic embedded in them, and they are not static. And the template editor is a place to check that logic against different stations. So here we have a typical road project set up in RoadEng. We've got a plan view with our horizontal, a profile view with our vertical, and we have our cross-section view. And this is showing our cross-section geometry as it has been applied at the current station. This cross-section geometry is set up in the template editor. The template editor is defaulting to showing our current station 340 as it is the one that is active in the design. However, we can move our template around here without affecting our actual designed alignment. So this template editor is basically like a big sandbox. We can check how things behave without making it live in our design. For example, we pull this down and we can see here that when we pull it down, our cross-section geometry changes and we now have a ditch. Which brings me to my next point. There is logic in each of these templates and they are adjusting based on the conditions that they meet or don't meet, like here, when there's no ditch in fill. And when we pull it down, there's a ditch and cut. We can use that sandbox behavior at the current station or navigate through different stations or leverage these 4 typical generic cross-section examples to be able to preview our logic. So that is our first concept. This template editor, it's a great tool to test and preview logic, and it's a sandbox that unless the template is applied to your design, we can just test it. So our second concept, templates are made from components. And in most cases, components have a left and they have a right. So here, with the template editor still open, we can see that we have several templates included in our template list. We have a rural template, an urban template, and we have a resource low volume template. When we expand these templates, you can see that they are made up of a series of components. In this template, we have our rural roadway component, There is a ditch component, and note that they are highlighted in magenta when they're selected. And we have a slope component. Now, the template itself at the sort of highest level doesn't include a lot of parameters. Most of the behavior and the parameters that we use to set up these templates are contained in these components. And then my second point on this one is you'll see that most of the components have both a left and a right side to them. So that's something that as we go to add a new component to the template in the future, we would likely want to make sure that we've got a different left and right side. So that was our second concept. Templates are made out of components, and components most often have a left and a right side. Concept 3. And I think this one's my favorite one because it's definitely a point that we get to our support team a fair bit, which is you don't need to create a template from scratch. It's like you've got all the ingredients available to you. It's just a means of assembling them together. So we can combine components from the eLibrary in order to make a template that matches our needs. So here's an example. We have a rural road template that's existing, and we just need to add a barrier to it. So in this case, we can copy the template and paste as new. Then we can update it so that we know what it's called in the future and access it, so we can change the name, the description, and then we're going to be able to add some other components to it or to modify it in order to match what we'd like to work with. If you don't have a component already that you're looking for, the best place to look for it is in the eLibrary. A whole bunch of folders up there, and we're able to download those folders and access the components that are in it. In this case, I'm looking for a barrier. I'm going to take the Jersey barrier here, and it follows that same workflow of we're going to copy and paste as new, but in this case, as new left. Before we go to copy it to make it a right, we just want to make sure that we've updated our parameters so that we don't have to avoid doing two updates. So here we can change the barrier's offset from centerline, press OK, see the impact. Maybe we want to change it again because we didn't get it right the first time. And then once we're happy with it, we're going to copy and paste as new right, remembering that most components have a left and a right as we discussed in concept 2. So that's a quick example at how we can combine components to create new templates. So our fourth concept is creating new templates by combining components. So in this case, we are not starting off with a base template. We're going to create a new one, and then we're going to add components to it. Now, those components, as you saw a little bit in the last one, are essentially like fillable forms, but we can control some of them through Boolean switches. So you can control the logic through Boolean switches within these forms. And let's take a look at that. So in this case, we need a template that is something entirely different from our existing templates altogether. So we can click and add a new template to our template editor. Again, we can update the name, the description, as well as we can control some high-level properties like the crown. And then we can go up to our eLibrary to look for and to locate components that we want to customize and populate it with. So in this case, from our roadway components folder, we'll take the mine road with safety berm. We copy, move up to our new template and paste as new. And here is where I'd set my parameters to match what I'd like. Again, doing that before I copy and paste it is right. Yeah, in this case, parameters are fine. We're just going to hit OK, and then we're going to copy and paste as right. So now we have a roadway component that's for both the left and the right. And then next, we are going to look at adding a ditch component. Now, in this example, we're going to use a standard ditch. We could go to our eLibrary and copy that, Or we could copy a ditch that we have already updated from an existing template. So again, that same workflow, copy, paste as left, update it if we need to, and paste it again as right. The final element to customizing this new template is adding a slopes component. And this is a mine road example. We're going to use benched slopes. So we found the slopes. We've pasted as new left. Again, all of these components have logic in them, but this particular one is an example that I mentioned. It's a Boolean switch that allows you to define the logic. So in this case, there's a variable here, or parameter. It says apply and fill. If we have the value as 1, it's applied in fill. If we set it as 0, it is no longer applied in fill. So you can see here that when we are in fill, there are no benches. We can add a slope component that works for benches. I mean, for, for fill situations that doesn't include benches. And as long as our order is correct, more on that one later, we can place it here at the bottom and it'll work in that fill situation. So that's a little bit of a look at creating a totally brand new template that's not really brand new. It's a matter of taking the pieces that we want, combining them together, updating them, and making sure we've got a left and a right for them. So that was concept number 4. Moving right along, this is concept number 5. I'm going to say this is probably one of our more complicated ones, so we'll spend a bit more time on it. But templates have a thing called a point code, a whole bunch of point codes associated with them. And they also have surfaces. And you can display and report both surfaces and point codes. And this is going to have a lot of implications in other windows. So these both point codes and surfaces may not require any action on your part, but they are really important to be aware of as they do impact how volumes are tracked, how line work and shading are generated, and they can even influence how various components are connected to each other. Again, more on that one in a concept or two. But for now, let's take a look at what's what. For surfaces, we can see in this example that the material that makes up my road's running surface is being shown separately from the subgrade. If I'm unsure what any material is that's being tracked, right-click and you can turn on hatching for that layer. So here we've hatched subgrade cut and fill. We can do the same for SRF1, surface 1. And if you sort of hover over any layer, you can see there it says fill surface 1. So you're able to tell what the name of a layer is through those hover tips. Point codes are actually quite similar in that we can see what various points are being called in the cross sections with hover tips. So we had link left. Here we've got CBI1L, and those are our point codes. Now, it's useful to know what they are and to be aware of them, but the bigger piece is that we can now take that information and use it to control how things are displayed. So I'm just going to step through and fast forward this part through 2 quick examples. The first is how we can show separate surfaces in our 3D view. So here we're going to display surface 1 in its own color as a surface in our 3D view. And you can do this with practically any surface, controlling its color. In the plan window, there's a couple options you can look at for displaying and reporting and controlling. The first is using display shading. So here you can select, we just selected surface 1 as a material to show in display. And then lastly, we can take template codes and show them actually as line work. So here we're going to be able to select the point codes for our benches as well as for our berms and delineate them here and show them in our plan window. Of course, we could do these separately and have them set up to have different colors, but for just quick illustrative purposes, you can start to show the impact of these different point codes as a visual representation in your plan view. So as I mentioned, this is probably the most complicated of all the things that we're showing in today's webinar. So it warrants a little bit of a recap. So the first thing we talked about in this one, in concept 5, were surfaces. So templates are made up of surfaces. Template surfaces are used to track and report material volumes, and we can calculate and report these volumes by layer, as well as we can use visual features in the software in order to visualize them. Then we have point codes. So each template component has a set of predefined codes in it, and these codes can be connected to form linear features, much like we did with the berms and the benches, or you could use pretty standard ones like road edges or ditch lines. Yeah, and so they're really, really useful, and the point codes can be displayed in plan, profile, section, data, all those different windows. So that was concept 5. We talked about point codes and we talked about surfaces. They're more of a need to know, and then it gives you some tools that you can use for display and reporting of them. Back to our template editor and the building of templates, and that's concept number 6, component order matters. And as I referenced a little bit earlier or alluded to, components have connection points. So let's take a look at that. So inside the template editor, with the components within a template, the order of those components matters. There's a construction sequence that goes from the top down. And if we were to shift a component like this barrier up to the top, you'll notice that it is now attempting to attach to our original ground, which obviously it can't attach to a surface that doesn't exist yet. So that type of component needs to be at the bottom after our roadway and our other services have been constructed. Another thing worth noting here is how they are connected. So here we've got our connection. It's based on the center line. And if we go into the actual parameters for the template, we have an offset that we can control to that connection point. So in this case, 4.5 meters from the center line. If we change its connection type, that will impact where it is offset from. So here we're 4.5 meters from the outside, or we could reference one of those point codes that we just discussed in the last concept and have our component offset from that connection point. From that point code, sorry. So to recap this one, if you are building and compiling your template, most important element in this one is to consider your construction order. If something in your template doesn't seem to be working and making sense, think about looking at your order and be considerate or aware that you can change the connection point. Most of the time, you don't need to worry about changing these connection points to being something other than the default, but it is an option that you have. Okay, concept 7. Assign by range applies a template to a project. So as we saw, the template editor is our sandbox, and anything we do in there doesn't apply it to our project. So we're going to go in and take a look at how assign by range applies a template to our project. And as a sub-bullet to this, you can assign multiple templates along a corridor and by left and right sides. So this is our template editor. It's our sandbox, and it's where we test and make sure that templates are behaving the way that we'd like. Everything we do inside of this template editor will not be implemented unless we actually go and assign it by range. So we will take a look at that now. So you access assign by range right next to the template editor. And if we want to say apply that rural with barrier template to our design, so we go into this assign by range dialog, templates tab, find our template, figure out what range we'd like to apply it to, as well, or I should say what station range we'd like to apply it to, and then decide if we want it to be on the left side, the right side, or to apply it to both sides. So in this case, we're just going to do the left side from 220 to 390. And because we selected left, I'm just going to reselect it from the drop-down, hit Add Edit. A key part of the template application process is to press that button. And now, if in our design, clicking on one of the stations in that range, you can see here in the section view that we do have a barrier. A template is not a global parameter. So in this Assign by Range dialog box, we've got the ability to assign that template to only the left, only the right. We can assign it to both sides. We can assign different templates along the alignment of the road. And you can also have multiple alignments in your project that all use multiple templates. The next kind of key piece with templates, and when you're using multiple templates, is tapering between the templates. So concept number 8, a very important one, is you can taper between templates, and you're going to use the taper template from your Assign by Range dialog. So we are still, as I mentioned, in the Assign by Range dialog on our Templates tab, and there's some really key functionality here for both this concept and the one we're going to talk about next. Is we've got 2 templates in this example with different road widths, very abrupt transition between them. But you wouldn't build a road like that. So we're going to use the taper template that's available by default in our Assign by Range dialog to transition between the 2 templates. The taper template is not found in your template editor. It's one of 2 default templates that lives at all times in the Assign by Range dialog. And here, in order to apply it, we set the station range that we would like to represent the taper. In this case, let's say 50 meters. We'll go from 1570 to 1620, select taper template, hit Add, and now you'll see a much smoother transition between the 2 templates and a much more constructible one. So that's a really quick look at one of the 2 templates that comes by default inside of your Assign by Range dialog. The other one that comes standard with it is concept number 9, which is our bridge, no cut, no fill default template. Now there is another way to tackle bridges, and that's to use a customized bridge template from the template editor. But we'll take a look at both those options here in concept 9. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to go into that Assign by Range functionality, and this one's going to tackle bridges. So before that, you can use the template editor and go into our bridge folder and build out a deck in your cross-section. However, if you are just worried about having a gap along your alignment and not accounting for earthworks and not filling into a river, then the easiest way is to go to Assign by Range, just like the taper template, and utilize this BR bridge no cut, no fill template. It's always going to be in your list, not available in the template editor library, but again, it's a default in your Assign by Range list. We can set our station range, remembering to hit Add Edit in order to apply it. And then here, just looking at our 3D, you can see that we are no longer accounting for earthworks in this section. It is worth mentioning that although this was a bridge template and a bridge example, it's also really useful if you don't want to include earthworks for a variety of situations. So that one's there and available. Okay, concept 10. Final concept might be our first on-time webinar ever, so just want to let everybody know that. I'm pretty happy. Concept 10, templates are saved in template tables. You can save them, share them, and then set them as your default. So most users typically create a set of standard templates for use in their common design situations. Templates, template components, and road class specifications are stored in a template table file called a TPL file. And if you're constantly doing a certain type of project, it's best to use one of these template tables in order to avoid having to redo work. So if we save our table, we're presented in its default location. And if we save it as normal.tpl, that is going to make this your default template table when you open the software. Alternatively, if it's something that you don't use all the time but want to have are able to pull, you can give it its own name and we can load it in on another future project. So here, we're going to save this one as mine cross sections. And if we go into a different project, we can go into our templates and we're given two options to access that table: open table and merge table. So let's start by pressing open table. In this case, when we select mine cross sections, it's actually replacing everything inside of our template editor with that template table. When we use the merge function, it's going to give us the option to select which templates we would like to insert, and it's going to add them to our existing list. So now I've got different templates at my the way I'd like them. You can also, and it wasn't included in that short video, but you're also able to share a template table with colleagues if you're working on the same project to keep it simplified. Okay, so that was 10 key concepts that we feel like you need to understand and know in order to work with cross-sections in RoadEng. Let us quickly go through them one more time. So templates have logic. That template editor is your sandbox to test the logic as well as to build it. Templates are made from components that have a left and a right usually. You don't need to create a template from scratch. Copy and paste it. You can combine and customize components to make new templates and leverage the eLibrary for that. Lots of resources in there in terms of cool components. Templates have point codes and surfaces. You can display and report these. Component order matters, and those components have adjustable connection points. You use the assign by range dialog to apply your template to a project. You can taper between templates, account for bridges with your no-cut, no-fill default template, and you can save, share templates, and set them as default through template tables. Which brings me to probably the very last point of our webinar, and then we'll tackle a question or two. Is that templates are crazy powerful and can get a fair bit more complicated than this. If you're interested in learning more about overrides, reference features, reference surfaces, starting and create your own templates from scratch, ground types, layers, materials, and even more about codes, as well as advanced parameters, we do have another webinar that's going to go into just another level of complexity. So if you're interested in it, it's happening October 6th, 11 a.m. It's on advanced cross-section templates. We are making this one available exclusively to folks that are part of our support program just because of the complexity associated with it. If you're interested, you can register up at softree.com/free webinars. If you're not sure if you're on support, register anyways. I guess there's no harm in having your thing declined if you're not on. And with that, that's all I had. Let's tackle some questions in our one remaining minute. I do have a colleague here that maybe I'll tag to answer some questions. Matt, are you online?
I am, yep.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to let you tackle them. Okay, when do you use advanced components?
So there's advanced components in some of the templates, and yeah, so it may be that you see something that in your existing template that isn't affected by the parameters that you see by default, or it could be that you have a template that looks very close to what you'd like, but you're wondering if there's a little additional hidden functionality. So with that, I'll just share my screen here for a moment. And
Awesome, because I think you're going to want that up for the next question.
okay. Let's take a peek here. So in this case, we have our daylight showing up here. And if I expand this, first, if I'm wondering what's controlling this cut that isn't going up like a normal cut slope and it isn't a fill. I would cycle through and look for what's being highlighted in magenta. So in this case, that parameter is living in my ditch component. And if I go through these components or these parameters that I'm seeing, it's not controlling that. But if I look up here, we can see we have show advanced parameters, and then there's a bunch of additional functionality in some of our templates that you can pull from to do all sorts of special things, like adding a ditch back slope, and in this case, changing our ditch daylight distance. We set that to 0. It's not daylighting. It's going to just add a ditch. So that's an advanced parameter. I used the ditch example in this one, but there's all sorts of different parameters that are kind of hidden away to avoid kind of overwhelming folks with options that are less commonly used.
Okay, excellent. Well, with your screen still showing, let's tackle another one here. So I'm just going to read the question word for word out loud. I had a project where I needed to place geotextile every 3 feet of fill. Is there a way to do this in templates to come up with a surface area of geotextile?
Yeah, I believe so, but for that one, I'm not 100% sure on the best solution, and it probably depend on the exact geometry that you'd like. So for that one, I'm going to take the easy way out and see if you can follow up with us with project specifics. We can look into the best solution. So to answer that.
Excellent. Okay, 2 more. Can you save templates on a shared drive?
Yeah, it's just a matter of hitting save table. I'm going to just include all of it, but then you can just navigate to wherever you'd like. So with that, I could navigate to any other drive I had and save it there. With that, if I save my normal, it's not going to default to that normal in any folder. Now that being said, if you wanted to save that or change where your default file directory is, you can do that, but I'll leave that out of my demonstration just to avoid people putting things in funny places. But if you have specific questions, we can help out individuals with that.
Awesome. Last but not least, this one's more of an administrative one. Is there a certificate included with the webinar? Yes, there is. Your certificate when you attend a live webinar is automatically generated by GoToWebinar and distributed 1 hour after the completion of the webinar. If you don't get your certificate, you can reply back to our webinar account. I believe that's news@softree.com, and someone will assist you. With that, I'm actually going to keep this one as close to on time as possible today. So I just wanted to say thank you all for joining me for a Warp Speed 10 concepts you need to know about cross-section templates. Thanks, Matt, for being in the wings to tackle some questions. If you have any further questions on this webinar, feel free to send them to our support team, which is support.team@softree.com. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day and look forward to seeing some of you at Advanced Cross-Section Templates coming up in the first week of October. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.